And then, another aspect that I wanted to talk about, I'm wondering what you think about the idea of male abortion, as they call it. So, men being able to relinquish responsibility for a child legally.
Are you asking me or Philip?
Well, Philip's not here, so I'm asking you.
Oh, Philip's
I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
I'm back. Hello. I was here the whole time. I was listening to you. No. I did both of you watch the what's the comedian Dave Chappelle? Did you watch the Dave Chappelle special?
Yes, I know the one you're referring to. Yes.
Yeah. So Dave Chappelle said in his comedy special, he said, "Oh, hey guys, just to let you know, I think abortion should be 100% exclusively up for the woman to decide. So it's just something between the woman and her doctor." And all the women in the audience were like, "Woo!" Yeah. And he was like, "Oh, wait. But if you can abort the fucker, then we don't have to take any responsibility if you want a baby." Like, so, and then everybody, there was like dead silence. And then he said, but maybe I'm wrong. But maybe we're both wrong.
Brilliant.
And it was brilliant. And I would say I'm with Dave Chappelle. I'm not a huge fan of abortion. And I'm really not a big fan of men being able to not take responsibility. I think people should just take responsibility, everybody. And I think that the government should help people taking responsibility. And I think our society should support people with that. So, for example, I know I have a friend, and she was bullied by her mom and by society into having an abortion, and she's incredibly traumatized, and it's her biggest regret. And she's like, why did I listen to them? I wish I had this baby, even though the father didn't want to be there as a father. I just think the father should have the duty to be there. The health practitioners, nobody questioned it. Everybody pushed her towards having an abortion. I think that's horrible. Parents should always be supported to be parents and fulfill their duty. So I'm against male abortion.
So from my perspective on that, Liz, I'm similar to Philip, which is to say that I'm not a huge fan of abortion myself. I used to be a lot more pro-choice, and then a couple of things really pushed me further pro-life, which is to say my mother and my best friend, who's a female, they are incredibly pro-life. And my friend used to warn me that anytime you put a limit or a value on human life, anytime you tried to redefine it, it would always spiral out of control. And I used to kind of, say to her, listen, I get what you're saying, I get the principle, but it's not the 1940s, it's not Nazi eugenics, it's not going to get out of control. But then in early 2019, Governor Northam of Virginia talked about introducing a law where if a woman gave birth to a child who was severely deformed, and that was his word, severely deformed, she should be allowed to abort post-term. Within the first, day or couple of days, she should be allowed to abort. And there was all this thing about making it, quote unquote, making it comfortable. It sounded really, horrible and diabolic. And I wrote a tweet to him that said, just to check, am I allowed to call this severely disabled child a retard? Because I wouldn't want to insult anybody before I murder it. But so she warned me about that it would eventually spiral, and that's, an example that she's actually right. And another thing that really shifted my perspective was a friend that I knew at college, who, unfortunately, she in her youth had been raped by her father. This girl had, she'd been through enormous trauma. And she was by no means anti-feminist. She was very much feminist, very much, you know, about women's rights, and even to the point she was a little bit misandrist because she still had a lot of pain. And I talked to her about how there are states in America that force girls or young women who are having abortions to watch an abortion, you know, to see exactly what this procedure is before they actually are able to go through one. And there's lots of women's interest groups that say that this is unreasonable. And she said, oh, no, 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 that is a good thing. I wish I had known, because she had an abortion, not conceived of her father, conceived of her boyfriend consensually, but she had an abortion, and she said that she saw it. She saw the fetus, and it just looked like a tiny baby. Yeah. And she said that seeing that was more traumatizing than the rape.
Mm-hmm.
That really shook me.
I have a good friend, and she's almost 50 now, and so she never became a mother. But when she was young, when she was, I think, 17 or so, she got pregnant with her boyfriend, and she was pushed by her mom and by everybody surrounding her into an abortion. And she had an abortion, and she saw them throwing her baby boy into a bucket. And sorry. And she's still completely traumatized by it. And when she told me the story, similar to now, it's so heartbreaking, because she never had a baby, and that was taken away from her, because the people surrounding her didn't support her. And if her mom, if somebody would have said, "We're standing with you," if somebody had told her what an abortion is, she wouldn't have done it. And I think when you decide something like that, there should be something like 3 times you have to say, yes, I want that. And like they should have say, these are the consequences. I think people should. I don't even know if people should have the choice anymore. And I used to be very pro-choice when I was younger. My mom had an abortion. I wouldn't be here if my mom hadn't had an abortion, because I'm the third one. So she aborted the first one, then my brother, and then me. So it's possible that I wouldn't be here. But in Germany, it was just the standard that pro-abortion. It's just human rights, so to speak. And even when I was young, I was like, oh yeah, of course abortion should be fine, but I wouldn't want it in my life. And now I'm like, no, I'm just against it. It's not great. It's not for society.
My sister, when she was 17, she got pregnant. She'd used contraceptives, and there'd been that slim chance that they didn't work, and she got pregnant. And obviously, just like anyone of her age would, she deliberated about having an abortion. And she said the thing that swung it for her was imagining that there's a soulmate for everybody, and that she was removing the soulmate for somebody if she had an abortion.
Wow.
And my nephew, he's 11 now, and I can't overstate what an absolute joy he is. He's such an amazing child, and I love him to pieces. And if I knew everything I know now and could go back there, like, I would be on my hands and knees begging that she had a baby, because it's brought such joy to our lives. And I that a lot of feminist rhetoric revolves around, oh, it's not the right time, and what if there's a financial problem, and blah blah blah. And I'd love to know the statistics of how many women choose not to have an abortion. They were thinking about it, and how many women choose not to have an abortion and regret not having an abortion. Yeah. Because I imagine it would be incredibly low.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, I am pragmatically pro-life. I find the idea of killing unborn children to be just absolutely awful. But I am aware that mammals do kill their young, you know, and always have. And I think we are, you know, as human beings, a higher form of mammal. And, you know, we have principles and ideas. And I hope that at some point, you know, look back and go, oh my God, we were so barbaric. How could we have murdered our children? But I don't think we're ready to make that step yet. And I think that if we were to make abortion illegal, you know, women would still kill their babies. They just do it less safely.
I totally agree, Liz, and I hear that all the time from feminists. And one thing I would say is that if you ban anything, it still happens.
Yeah,
you know? Like,
but I mean, what I kind of think needs to change in the UK is like the Overton window on the conversation needs to be pushed open, because at the moment the only acceptable kind of opinions to express in the public square are abortion is perfectly fine and great, and you know, women who are having abortions shouldn't be harassed outside the clinic, you know. And if you look at the actions of the Good Counsel Network in not Croydon, I can't remember, it was a London suburb, they were banned from operating outside of an abortion clinic because feminists said they'd been harassing women. So I looked into what they'd been doing, and what they had been doing was holding prayer vigils outside the clinic, handing out leaflets that detailed information about abortions, and also offered support in terms of finances, housing and counselling if women would choose to keep the baby. They were, you know, the Guardian said that they had been holding placards that were like, you know, gratuitously horrible. And when I looked at them, the pictures on the placards were of babies in the womb, which I would say are the most incredible and beautiful pictures that human beings have managed to take, you know, on a par with those that we can take of space these days. And there was, you know, a hearing at the council where they decided to put this public space protection order on them, which is the same order that they used to stop homeless people sleeping anywhere comfortable, by the way. And they brought along with them all these women and children, and the women had been going for an abortion, then met the Good Counsel Network and thanked Christ that they had listened to them and kept their babies. But they were ignored because those women don't support the feminist narrative on abortion, so it doesn't matter what they think. So yeah, I think we need free speech. You know?
Absolutely.
That's
where America really has the upper hand here.
We need like men to have opinions, because, you know, I saw a fella on Twitter a few years ago, and he'd penned an article which said, you know, the first sentence was like, I completely support a woman's right to choose whether she has an abortion. And then, you know, he talks about, you know, his girlfriend having had one and him being really traumatized. And he was like dogpiled on Twitter for rejecting a woman's right to choose. And he hadn't. It was right in there that it should be able to, but he just wanted to express the fact that it hurt him. And, you know, that was too. The other thing that I have issues with on the subject is like, I think it's kind of wrong. You know, we have at the 12-week ban, there's an option to get this measurement done on the baby's neck, and it tells you how likely your child is to have Down syndrome. And if your child may have Down syndrome, then you can get further investigation or just abort, you know, and Down syndrome babies are aborted more often than not, as far as I know.
Yes.
And there's fantastic speech that this guy called Frank Stevens gave in Congress in America, and he's a guy with Down syndrome. Yeah, and you know, he gives this great speech on why we should not be just aborting all these kids. But one of the points he raises is that families who have a member with Down syndrome consistently rate themselves as happier as families who don't have a member with Down syndrome.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, you know, it's just like we're talking about, isn't it? You know, I'm just not convinced that the values we have are the most important, best values. You know, it's like power, money,
Well, we
being normal.
Self.
My old sociology,
it's an obsession with self.
My old sociology lecturer told me, you know, that he'd done the maths, and in Scotland alone, since the 2000s, a city the size of Aberdeen has been aborted.
Wow. That's mental.
You know, and it's like even the people who fought for it, you know, back in the 70s, none of them knew what it was going to become. You know, none of them knew, like, they fought for it for the reasons that the average person fights for it, which is, you know, what if it was a rape victim? What if it was incest? What if it was abuse, etc., etc.? What if the mother's health was in danger? They fought for the very, very normal reasons that people would. But nowadays, we know that less than 2% of all abortions are anything to do with those. It's just it tends to just be about convenience, you know, and like I do believe, you know, that it's a sorry state of affairs that, like, for example, something like the nuclear family is looked down upon. That's like a taboo now, the idea of promoting the nuclear family. But we do know scientifically that is the strongest environment for children. That is the best environment for them to grow up in. You know, and I've said to many people that what really bothers me is how feminists will ignore the voices of women who are pro-life. They will act like they don't exist, and they will reshape the arguments with ridiculous straw men. So rather than saying a pro-lifer, even if you disagree with it, which you're allowed to, rather than saying a pro-lifer is someone who believes that this is a human life and I disagree because science, blah, blah, blah. Instead of saying that, they say it's men wanting to control women's bodies. And what I always think is that if you have to be disingenuous about what the other side is saying, then your argument isn't strong enough to stand up to it. You know, if you if science can back up that, you know, there's a line where a baby stops being a zygote or an embryo or a fetus and starts being a human being, because they like to use these words. They like to just bamboozle you with, you know, as many medical terms as they can Google. Is there a definitive line that science can give us where a human life begins? Because depending on your politics, it jumps from, you know, a couple of weeks to 9 months to, in Virginia, after the baby is born. You know, so like you know, to bring it back to your original question, Liz, I believe that people should not be so obsessed with sex that they should be willing to kill a child over it. And I think that people should only have sex if they're prepared for the consequences, the same way that we only take other risks that we might enjoy if we're prepared for the consequences. We only drive if we're prepared for car crashes. You know, we only skydive or ski if we're prepared for those habits to go wrong. And we should only have sex if we're prepared for the outcome that a baby might be born. But my addendum is that for anybody who is pro-choice, they absolutely have to be pro-choice for both. Otherwise, they're a massive hypocrite. Because to say that men, no uterus, no opinion, well, it's like, fine, no uterus, no obligation then. You know, if I'm not allowed an opinion on my future, I don't have an obligation to go along with it. So men, as it stands, live in a pro-life world. Women live in a pro-choice world, but men live in a pro-life world. If a man gets a woman pregnant and he's not ready to be a father, people say, well, tough. You had sex, you knew what could happen. Whereas if a woman gets pregnant and she's not ready to be a mother, people say, oh, well, it's not your fault, blah, blah, blah. You shouldn't have to do this. And it's like, you know, if we're going to choose, it has to be for everybody. So we either have to have a society that's prepared to accept responsibility for its actions, or we have to have a selfish society. But if it's going to be selfish, then everybody should be allowed to be selfish.
I wonder,
as part of, you know, letting men, giving men more options in terms of contraception, I do think that men should be able to relinquish their responsibility for children, certainly at present, you know, until women have a pro-life world. And I suspect that those two measures or policies or whatever would have, they would see far fewer accidental pregnancies, to be perfectly honest. You know, I think at the moment it's pretty, you know, women are kind of, there are too many perverse incentives to make that unilateral decision that shouldn't be a unilateral decision. And I think that if they knew that they would be on their own and, you know, they wouldn't be getting financial support from whatever man, then they might think twice before taking him.
True, but the problem is that they would, as long as they get financial support by the government, so from taxpayers' money, I think it would just become worse and worse and worse. Because, like, the man would take less responsibilities. The women wouldn't start to take responsibilities because the government still pays for it. So I think it would only work if man and the government would have to take less responsibility. Only that would increase women's responsibility.
I love when you say to a feminist, you say that men should be able to walk away as well, and then they say, oh, but what about if the single mother, you know, was poor or whatever? And it's like, well, first of all, since when did you have a problem with single mothers? You endorse them all the time. Are you agreeing that a nuclear family is better? And secondly, if the mother's going to be poor, well, she can abort the fucker. Wasn't that your position to begin with?
Yeah, I don't want to live in that world.
No, I don't want to. It's like Dave Chappelle said, if you can abort it, I can at least abandon it. You know, and if we're all going to be as nasty as that, we should at least be honest about it. We shouldn't keep hiding from ourselves what we're doing.
Yeah, I'm for less nastiness.